I'm going to do something traditional. Normally, I'd let you introduce yourself first, but I want to go first so that I can have an enormous compliment and lead right into our session after you introduce yourself.
Cool.
I'm Scott Messer, SVP of Media at Leaf Group. I oversee revenue operations and a bunch of our portfolio sites. Been in this game for a while. Really like talking to all of you, and thank you for having me here. Now, Emily, please introduce yourself, because many people have not heard of you before.
Right. Cool. Hi.
This side of the equation.
Hello. My name's Emily Healy. I'm from Publicis Media. I sit on our digital standards team. So yeah, it's fantastic to be here and just have this conversation with you.
Let me ask you, what does it mean to be on the digital standards team, and what was your sort of work over third-party data into Context now?
Right, yeah, so I started my work here at Publicis Media on our verified team, where I evaluated and vetted partners that handled consumer data, so third-party verification, third-party data partners, DMPs, et cetera. I made the switch to our digital standards team, and we are primarily focused on questions around media quality, suitability, brand safety and suitability, as well as brand integrity. So contextual actually kind of sits across two things, right? So we do see contextual, right, as a way to expand and augment audience targeting in future. It's by no means the only tool we have in that toolkit. We also use contextual in the brand safety and suitability realm as well. We go back and forth, right, on the most appropriate approach and recommendation there, because it will affect scale, right? So that's why this conversation around contextual is incredibly important, for sure.
So, and we're going to get into those pieces specifically, but the reason why I asked about that piece of history is because you're a bit of a unicorn, and publishers don't think you exist.
I do exist.
At least that's how I felt when I met you, and you definitely do exist. That is real. And for the people in the crowd, this is my real room today. I have changed the flowers. You can get the downloadable NFT background later in the session. We'll see. Long joke in here, Emily, about my background. The reason why it's so interesting to be speaking to you is because you had a history of sort of bringing the third-party data into the platforms and making sure that it was qualified, correct, it worked, it measured, and then that sort of hit like a maturity point where it's like, okay, it does what it's supposed to do, and we just make sure that it continues to do that. And then your new digital solutions group sort of sprung up, and obviously brand safety and quality became big issues of that. And context becomes an interesting piece because context isn't new. It's very old. In fact, it's the first thing, the only thing that people could target on the internet. And now I presume you're getting a lot of requests about context and a lot of questions of what is it, how good is it, how quality is it, and is there an answer?
Yeah, not a straightforward one, I think. There is, I think, a point of limitation in scale, because at the moment, not all the buying platforms make contextual available at scale. From our end, we're trying to pressure them into allowing contextual controls, but to your point, from a standardization of collection methodology and categorization, there is a standard on the brand suitability and safety side, right? We have the Foray's suitability floor and scale. That said, right, there is room for improvement around the methodology component. I think that contextual it's always been there. It's always been a great part of our toolkit. Now it's getting a lot more focus, right? So there's perhaps a little bit of a room for improvement, but I'm confident that it's very much achievable. Does that make sense?
Let me ask you some questions about like what is context inside of a DSP?
Sure.
And places where publishers don't go. When we talk about targeting context, how much of it is, I'm going to say there's sort of two kinds. There's like this site is generally about that, or this movie section is about entertainment. And then there is the hyper granular flow of data of these URLs are specifically about these topics. and they're passed by vendors like Oracle, Grapeshot. DSPs have some of their own, like in DV360 and in AdWords, like they have their own context. They're like, tell me what you want to find and we'll go find it for you.
Right.
I think those are the two general categories. Are there any others that I'm missing?
Okay. You're really definitely challenging my.
You can say no and we can continue.
I think you covered it pretty well, right? I would say that we are starting to see advancement, right, in natural language processing, in understanding the full context and sentiment of a page. Like that is something we're starting to see. But I would say traditionally, right, what we're used to seeing, what is currently scalable and in the platforms now is what you just described.
Gotcha. And do you think, take a guess if you're allowed to, and I'm sorry. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation. What percentage of buyers are like really using context versus general category?
That's a great question. I don't know in aggregate off the top of my head. I do know in some of the conversations we've had previously, they're almost all using context in some form, right? I feel like the definition of that might vary just a little bit. And again, it will depend a little bit on the platform they're running in. Like I mentioned, some of the buying platforms don't have as robust an offering. That said, I mean, as we see the retirement of cookies, right, I think we'll probably see a bigger move over to category, if that makes sense. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
It does.
Yeah.
I think it's, when we talk about context, there's things of, like, are buyers really using it? Because when we have conversations with them, sometimes they're like, I get you know what your context is, but I don't know what to do with it.
Right. Yeah.
Similar to when a publisher says, I have a great first-party data segment, and can I send it to you in the DSP? And they say, I just don't know where to like put it and fit it in the plan and how to measure it. So maybe that dovetails into my next question of like, how usable is context as you see it from the buy side and the agency side? Like, what's broken? I want to get to like what publishers can do for you because we're working on solutions.
Right. Yeah. So I think first off, it's great that we're having these conversations, right? Because advancements in the technology used for targeting contextual will also have the additional benefit of really helping to support suitability. Which will also allow us to further refine that practice, right? So it might seem a little counterintuitive, but as this technology gets better, it's not going to expand what we might need to block. It's actually going to refine it. So it'll allow us to target, delineate between what's completely unsuitable versus what is suitable in appropriate context. And I think that's key. So we talk a lot about, finding the audience in the right spot. I think that as we look at contextual and its evolution, it's kind of both those things. It's allowing us to find suitable placements in the appropriate context. News is a great example of this, right? We know that it benefits brands to be on trusted news sources, but it needs to be appropriate for that brand, right?
Right.
And from the flip side, from the targeting side, I think that the more we know about a page or potential audience that might be viewing that page, the better. That said, I would be remiss to point out that usability, right, and workflow will matter here a little bit, right? That said, I don't believe that our agencies would be opposed to additional steps or additional processes if the product performs.
Of course. I'm going to circle back to that in a second. Are there any like winning contextual solutions out there?
Yeah, that's a hard question, right? It kind of reminds me, like back in my days of data, I would often tell our clients and agencies that you need to match methodology to the audience you're attempting to reach. And I think that contextual is going to probably follow a similar path. So I think that it's less a question of what's winning the market entirely versus what's winning for a specific client, what's working to reach that audience, if you will.
So then that might lead to a solution where buyers are trying different vendors, achieving different things and getting more bespoke solutions that work for their thing rather than like AdWords.
Yeah.
right? As like this is just a thing, put your words in it, let it go, let Facebook run, sort of solution. So that doesn't scalable yet, exactly. It's still limited to ecosystems and then I guess vendors and publishers are vendors in the same one would have different qualities of data, different methodologies for constructing it. Because I presume that if I think I might go into my chocolate cake analogy here.
Right. Yeah.
So if they hand you two IAB standard segment lists and say we have finance and cooking and home and this and that, you say okay, that's great. And you run two campaigns against it, and one wins and one doesn't. Mm-hmm. You don't really know exactly why. And the truth is that the methodology of what created those segments could be very different. Mm-hmm. And so we look as publishers have ingredients.
Right.
Vendors have recipes, and buyers want chocolate cakes. And so everybody can define a different type of chocolate cake, and everybody's got a different recipe for them. There's different ingredients. And what I think a lot of the publisher side is working on, and the vendors I know are working on as well, is what is that recipe? Mm-hmm. And what is your availability to the ingredients? Right. Publishers obviously make their own ingredients. They grow them, they water them, they harvest them, they refine them, and then they process them. So that's an organic farm to table.
Right. Yeah.
There might be other people in the ecosystem that buy ingredients, mm-hmm. and that's interesting. And then there's people who take ingredients.
Right.
And that may limit the availability of them or the accuracy of them. And that's specifically, I think, I'm gonna say something and you can respond to this. And publishers don't know how other people have classified their inventory, mm-hmm. whether it's right or wrong. How would a buyer have to sort of like wrestle with that concept?
Yeah, in theory, it would be a component of optimization, actually. So we do the technology to look back and see what we delivered against and also what we did not deliver against, like what was blocked. So I would recommend to a buyer, if they start to see that, it's a question of scale, right? So if you're not scaling and you're using a specific offering, that would be a time to go in and look at the lists, right? From a publisher point of view, I would work with your teams to better understand what you are delivering against, if that makes sense. So I think like the relationship you have with the buying team will be key here. I think that as much as you can work with the buying team to make sure that they're flagging, right, to whomever, either blocking or not targeting, if that makes sense.
Right.
We do. These technologies are, these partners are important players, right? In media quality and suitability. Like I said, we do go back and forth over our recommendation of tactics. So there's always room for improvement, I think, with any technology, right?
Right. You said something to me last when we spoke about it has to be easy.
Yeah.
I think this is good general advice for everybody in anything that isn't even context of like how to get things into workflows. Mm-hmm. Do you remember what you said?
Oh gosh. I think it was that if there's additional lift, it has to be worth the reward, right? So if you have a really great solution, let us know about it. Also be very, very clear on what delineates you versus your competitive set. And then as soon as you can prove out its performance, do that, right? So yeah, lift needs to be reward. I think might be what I said. So.
Right. Because I'd have to imagine that a vendor who comes in says, and we have a way to measure this in some fashion, right? Mm-hmm. So publishers are sort of stuck being like, well, I can measure myself, or we can do like a Nielsen thing, but then I need to compare it to something. Do you have any thoughts for publishers on like how to think about that, or just say?
I think that's a great question.
Like, what would you accept from us, from publishers?
From publishers? So, well, from our end, from the standards end, we're very much a fan of the MRC. So MRC accreditation is fantastic. That's my top recommendation. There's other tools and solutions as well. I think measurement's also in a fun situation because of the cookieless future. So I would really recommend MRC accreditation, and then kind of go from there and see what's achievable with the buying workflow that you have and the product availability.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question from the Lynn crowd. She didn't start herself. What was the question I asked, Lynn? From the sell side, how will you prove performance with contextual? We have measurement ideas. It's a hard thing to do, though. Mm-hmm. So we're packaging, we're scaling. What would you give publishers as advice for context? And we've got 2 minutes left. So
yeah, I mean, beside the components of workflow and ease of use, as far as standardization and methodology or improvement in general, really recommend working with industry bodies in that vein. So a big part of what myself and my team do here at Publicis Media is working with the industry to establish, change, and promote standards. And what is fantastic about that is it does allow buy side, sell side publishers, everyone to kind of come together and discuss what's achievable to set standards. It also allows us to think of the other side in a way we might not have before. So conversations like this are fantastic. It's really important that we continue to break down barriers. So yeah, so I think my biggest recommendations are outside again of being able to prove out performance and not being too heavy a lift, would just be continued participation and voice within industry bodies, specifically the IAB, 4A, SCARM, MRC.
And the work is certainly going on inside of those. And so we always encourage our publishers to go and join those. It's and this goes back to my unicorn comment, as strange as it's going to sound, publishers don't get to talk to the buy side enough. And it's very hard to find the collaborators and the people inside who make decisions or can at least guide us and help usher us so that we don't keep running into walls continuously or thinking that we're hitting walls. So what I want to say is I really appreciate you coming on and joining us today and talking to publishers and giving them hope that there are people like you who can help, and that it's not just going into the ether, and that our solutions can go places, and there are channels and there are people who will help, because the race for context is not over.
No, I think it might have just